Chapter 38. An Unfortunate Wedding Night. Aemond. Aemond, wake up. Prince Aemond, are you awake? Aemond! Aemond had heard him for a while, the voice disrupting his empty dreams, growing steadily louder until he was rudely dragged out of a heavy slumber. He sorely wished they hadn't. You need to wake up. Go away. Uncle, this cannot wait. Aemond grumbled, shivering from the chilly air and craving nothing more than to fall back asleep, but the nagging made such impossible. I regret having to inconvenience you at this hour, but it's urgent. What? Aemond sat up, the simple act of keeping his head upright taking a strenuous amount of effort. He heaved his lids open, blinking sleep out of his eyes to make sense of his surroundings. It didn't quite work. His expectations from a lifetime being awoken in his four-poster bed by Romeo, his personal valet, failed to align with his current reality. Glancing from the escritoire by the window to the bookshelf by the door, to the unlit fireplace and down to the hard bench he'd been sleeping upon, Aemond had to conclude that no, this certainly wasn't his chambers. This wasn't even on the same floor as his chambers. Begging the question, how did he end up retiring on a rigid bench in a cold study? This wasn't where he normally woke up, and Lucerys Surcell wasn't Romeo. What the fuck? Aemond groaned, pressing his fingers into his scalp, trying to rub away that throbbing ache making it difficult to think. He tied his hair back for the wedding, but most of it had come loose, leaving his hair greasy with a chunk of strands tangled in the string. Even the tiniest of head movements tugged uncomfortably at his scalp. Despite recalling drinking quite excessively the previous evening, Aemond's throat felt dry and he craved water. At the same time, something constricted his breathing, and it took him far too long to realize why. Aemond remained dressed in his yesterday's finery and must have rolled around in his sleep, tangling the draped cavalier shoulder cape around his neck. 7 hells. Was this what his mother meant when she claimed the gods would punish him his indulgences? How did Aegon handle such abuse of his senses? The cape came loose with some tugging, but when Aemond glanced at it, he startled badly when one of the dragon heads on the Targaryen sigil winked at him. Aemond dropped the cape while the middle head spewed a flare of flame-patterned embroidery across the black canvas, only for the memory to resurface a second later. Of course, this was Hariel's magic. She had magicked his Targaryen sigil during the dancing, and everyone had stared at it in a blend of uncertainty and poorly concealed envy. He danced with Hariel and the others. There had been entertainment, before his mother had requested someone find Bela. But instead of searching for the wayward bride, Aemond had escorted Hariel to her rooms, which was when... Aemond touched his mouth, reliving the thrill of finally kissing Hariel. Their first proper kiss, as Aemond had decided the former disastrous attempt didn't count. No, it did not. The details of their stolen moment returned in disjointed chronology, but the pleasure was vivid, as if the sensation of her soft kisses had seared a lingering imprint onto his lips. Warm and silky, she'd smelled so good, and it had been... maybe words were insufficient, and he could only summarize it as a heady bliss. When it came to experience, Aemond had been entirely forthcoming, as last night had been his first kiss. He couldn't see a way out of the small white lie, though what did the finer details matter? Aemond had fucked, but he'd never been kissed, since that was the way with whores. Aegon had brought him to a brothel for his 13th name day, under the explanation it was his duty as the elder brother to make sure Aemond was as educated as he was. Yet whores weren't paid for affections, but to quench lust. Such wasn't a topic he'd bring up with any respectable lady though, least of all her. Hariel had taken his first kiss, but Aemond hadn't known it would feel that good, and wondered when they could do it again. The possibility left Aemond with a ridiculous urge to smile and laugh, but though the kiss had been beatific, the matter it ended hadn't. Once again, Aemond pondered the idea of having the damned Grand Maester exiled. Who did the Grey Rat think he was? It's maybe a slight overreaction, it's not like he'd never get to kiss Hariel again. But fucking hell. Aemond had patiently waited to kiss Hariel for fucking years already. only for a prude like Maester Orwell to waltz by and ruin it. Regardless, it had been nice while it lasted, and Aemond covered a smile behind his hand. After all, at present Aemond was suffering some rather unpleasant company. What's the meaning of this, Luke? Peeking at the sky through the window by the escritoire, Aemond figured it couldn't be far past the hour of the nightingale, close to the crack of dawn. What was Lucerys playing at? Prancing the castle at an ungodly hour and bothering people who were just trying to sleep. As he was not in the mood for juvenile antics, Aemond laid back down, rolling onto his side and pulling his magical cape over his shoulders as a makeshift blanket. The bench was as uncomfortable as a rock, but he'd make do. The efforts required to stand upright and climb the stairs to his own chamber just wasn't worth it. The bastard made an angry sound of protest, which only delighted Aemond. "What are you doing? Don't go back to sleep!" Disgruntled, Lucerys kicked the back of the bench so hard it jostled Aemond over the side. He tumbled hard onto the cold carpet with a grunt. "What the fuck?" he snarled. It hadn't been a long drop, but his dropping head loudly protested any sudden jostling. "Have you been in here, wasting the night drowning in your cup?" "I was sleeping," Aemond snapped. "Did you just kick me off the bench?" "Aye, because you were falling back asleep." "With just one kick too. You're growing rather strong, aren't you?" Lucerys gaped at him. "Are you so oblivious you've missed everything? Or do you simply not care? This is urgent! Hariel broke into the Black Cells, someone killed Fang, and your brother is dying!" At that, Aemond adjusted up, propping his upper body on his elbows to squint at his nephew. "What in the seven hells are you talking about?" "Aegon fell from the belfry. If you do not get up and go to him, you won't get another chance to." Lucerys had been disobeying his mother's instruction to go to bed when he came across Aemond in the study, and as he was supposed to be asleep, he didn't follow to Aegon's quarters himself. "I have already seen him. It was becoming crowded and there's nothing I could do to aid Aegon, so Mother sent me and Jacaerys to bed," Lucerys explained, before heading towards his own chambers only a few doors down from the study. So Aemond set off alone, cursing his throbbing head and tumbling stomach the entire trek. If laying down had been uncomfortable, forcing himself to walk was like being a seasick green boy on a rocking ship. What were the chances Aegon was injured the one time Aemond happened to be suffering the aftermath of drinking too much? The timing was morbidly ironic. Aemond couldn't quite understand how he'd ended up so drunk either. His goblet had kept refilling throughout the hectic day, and he may have consumed one too many after his argument with Hariel. Then there'd been the refreshments served during the wedding feast itself. He lost track of his intake, forgetting to pace himself with water the way his mother always advised. It dulled his senses, making it a struggle to focus, and loosened his tongue. Aemond had known he was drunk, knew he should take care, but at that point the damage was already done, so what would one more drink hurt? Then another, and another. Sweet mother of Buff, but never again. He could only cringe, recalling with embarrassed clarity some of the things he'd said and done. Not to mention it wasn't worth being reduced to such a pathetic state as this, and the gods were truly punishing him for his indulgences too, turning a simple stroll to his brother's sickbed into an unbearable challenge. Shivering and weak, Aemond's stomach grumbled angrily, the nausea getting so bad he was forced to halt in the middle of the corridor, requiring a break to lean against the wall and taking deep breaths. It'd do no good if Aemond went to Aegon's sickbed and spewed all over him. Their mother would flail him. Considering the hour, there were an unusual amount of people wandering the halls. Their sagging hairdos and worn demeanor spoke of little sleep, if any, and Aemond didn't appreciate the somber nods and worried expressions following him. It was clear now. Luke had not exaggerated. They wouldn't look at him with faces fit for a funeral if it wasn't dire. The guards outside Aegon's quarters made sure no one unwelcomed entered. Even servants had been turned away, leaving the fresh clothes and water at the door for the guards to bring inside. Seeing the prince approach, Sir Criston opened the door, allowing the voices inside to drift into the hallway. "Had she been at her wedding as she was supposed to, Aegon wouldn't have fallen!" The female shouting was undoubtedly his mother, but she was so angry it sent a shiver down Aemond's spine. Aemond slid quietly into Aegon's apartment, though they were so occupied arguing that only Daeron and Rhaenyra turned to see him enter. Nearly his whole family was gathered, from Daemon to the Velaryons to the Hightowers, the only exceptions being the absence of Jace, Luke and Joffrey, who Aemond already knew had been sent to bed. Aemond had entered directly into the large solar of Aegon's apartments. A wooden partition had been pulled out, blocking Aemond's view into the connected bedchamber, dressing room and snuggery. He couldn't see beyond the screen, but he could hear rustling of movements. His father was seated in an armchair by the fire, pained but alert in that way which meant the numbing effects of his milk of the poppy had passed. The spectacle of Aegon's wedding had strained the health of their king father. Suffering from his wasting disease and made to travel to and from the Great Sept, as well as participating in the feast that exhausted him. To prevent a scandal where the king collapsed before the court and wedding guests, his mother had convinced him to retire early. The king was the only one to retire for the night and looked to have been hastily dressed, standing as a contrast to everyone else who remained dressed in their best finery. Aemond and his king father were likely the only two within the room which slept. "I will have the truth of what happened, Helaena," His Grace demanded of his sister. Aemond watched the argument unfold from the sideline as he headed towards the partition. "It was a regrettable accident," Daemon said, while Rhaenyra placed a supportive hand on Baela's shoulder. Rhaenyra and Daemon stood on each side of Baela, her twin sister right behind them. The bride stood stiff as a plank, eyes downcast, her lips swollen, and her gown stained with dirt. Her rigid posture stood at odds with the way her twin kept shifting and fidgeting. Lord Corlys and Princess Rhaenys were present too, and though Baela was the only reason they would have been let inside Aegon's apartment at a time like this, they remained at the opposite end of the room, next to Aemond's cousin Ormond Hightower, and nowhere near either of their grandchildren. "Accident? My son has been maimed and your daughter is responsible!" His mother pointed angrily at the bride. "She lured him to the tower and made him fall! She meant to kill my son!" Aemond was gaining a better understanding of how this came to be, but became quite distracted when he reached the end of the partition. The shouting in the room suddenly turned oddly muffled as Aemond was faced with the unnerving condition of his brother. Aegon lay limp on his bed while Maester Orwell tended to him. Wrappings, blotted cloth, water and bowls were stacked on trays, and Aegon's pristine wedding attire had been discarded in a corner, torn in a way that left Aemond thinking they must have cut Aegon out of the fabric. He recognized the thick, white liquid of milk of the poppy in a half-empty jar, and assumed Aegon had already been generously dosed on a sedative. His brother was lost to the world, eyes closed and unresponsive. Yet whatever sleep he was held within, it did not look a peaceful one. His pallor was off, his breathing shallow, and his skin glistening with sweat. The blankets covered the full extent of his injuries, except where Maester Orwell had pulled up the sheets to tend to Aegon's left leg, and all he could discern was raw, swollen and bruised flesh. Blood had never bothered Aemond, but seeing Aegon in this state was making his stomach roll like a spinning wheel. Gods be good. Did the angle look off because Aegon was lying down, or was his leg twisted? "I asked you a question, girl." Aemond heard his king father speak, and he turned away from his brother. He needed to know more. "Your king demands an answer." "You were caught in an argument when Aegon fell, your grace," Helaena said, her strained eyes locking on the floor below. "But Lady Baela did not push Aegon over the edge." "Their yelling was overheard from the yards below!" Their mother stared at Helaena in disbelief, betrayal widening her eyes and deepening the frowns on her brow. Seeing his sweet sister struggle against the ire of both their mother and father, Aemond barely held himself back from walking into the middle of the scene. He didn't like the accusing tones directed at Helaena, but he also wanted to know what had happened. "Because they were yelling, mother. They were quarreling," Helaena said quickly. "But Aegon's footing was made unsteady by the icy floor and he slipped." "If it was not but a verbal disagreement, how come Baela's face is swollen?" "Aegon struck Lady Baela over her acts of disobedience, mother," Helaena revealed to the room, and honestly, Aemond had no issue picturing that. Once she showed her true colors, Baela turned into a little beast. "Then she struck him. They yelled at one another, and he slipped." Their mother whirled to look beseechingly at the king. "You have it there, my king! She raised a hand to her prince! Had Bela not struck him, he would not have fallen!" "Alicent, she's half his size. She's but a little girl, and Aegon's a man grown," Viserys said, frowning. Aemond was not as dismissive. Bela was small, but she carried surprising force in those tiny fists. He recalled the sting well. "This does sound like an accident." "I want her gone!" the queen demanded, pointing at Bela. Rhaena wrapped her arms around her twin, as if trying to hide Bela from the wrath of the queen. In contrast, Bela was staring at the ground, for once without remark, reaction or emotion. Someone who didn't know better might mistake her cowed mummer's farce for remorse. "That is no wife of my son," his mother insisted. "The marriage was never consummated." "Aye, perhaps it's for the better to remove Bela," Daemon agreed. "As from everything I've observed during these festivities, it seems the security of the Red Keep has gone to the dogs. From the unattended towers to the disorganized lower dungeons. The one sheltering under your roof turns up broken, tortured and murdered. And I'd agree it's for my daughter's safety to remove her from your lacking management." "Cease that, Daemon," the king warned, and turned to Aemon's mother. "Bela remains Aegon's lawful wife, as she committed no crime. You've heard the same tale from both Bela as well as your daughter." "They were not the same tales," his mother hissed. "As Lady Bela conveniently failed to mention she attacked him." "My daughter also failed to mention Aegon attacked her first," Daemon cut in. "As a good wife ought, Bela sought to govern her husband's honor. It'd be in poor taste to tarnish her husband's reputation while he's in mortal peril." Alicent shot a contemptuous glare at her good brother, but Daemon wasn't the only one not taking her side. "Don't allow your grief to control your sense, Alicent," the king said. Your son's life is hanging in the balance. He's fighting Stranger's lore as we speak and is permanently damaged. Yet you will do nothing to give him justice. That is insufficient. This can't be allowed to stand, Viserys. She tried to kill my son. She lured him to the edge of the belfry and now he's broken. It was your cunt of a son who chose to climb a tower whilst drunker than a Triarchy pirate at a brothel celebrating his last reaving. Daemon cut her off, glaring at the queen with the predatory intensity of a dragon. "I understand the unflattering reality of drunken men isn't something a sheltered lady who's never ventured beyond the castle walls will be well versed with, so allow me to educate you, Lady Alicent. Men as piss-drunk as your son normally can't walk a straight line on a warm summer's day across flat earth, far less balance icy towers in the pitch dark of night. Yet Aegon did, then attacked his wife, and by the will of his utter ineptitude, fell." "Daemon," Viserys warned. His uncle jutted out his chin, showing no remorse for his crude language and insult to the king's progeny. "What? Someone whose house sigil is a damn tower should know how easily a wine bibber falls off them." Daemon side-eyed Otto, saying almost innocently, "Didn't one of your uncles jump from the high tower a couple decades back?" "Daemon!" "I'm only pointing out how this is somewhat of a family tradition amongst the high towers. And the last time a high tower fell from their tower, the house didn't waste time spreading baseless accusations against innocent witnesses." The end of Daemon's statement was overlapped by a roar. It could only be a dragon's roar, but what gave everyone pause was how the proximity sounded far too close to the castle, which didn't make sense. The dragon should be chained down for the night, either in the tunnels underneath the dragon pits or along the beach caves. Either way, whilst within the seclusion of their nests, a dragon's roar was too far away to be heard by people inside the Red Keep. "Aegon is the king's firstborn son, and a Targaryen," his grandfather said tightly, momentarily ignoring the sound to remind the Rogue Prince that he could try to call Aegon a Hightower all he wanted, but it didn't change how Aegon remained far ahead of Daemon in the lawful line of succession. "And if he fell off Sunfire," Daemon said slowly, "it'd be a rather moot point to blame the dragon, wouldn't it, Otto?" A second roar rang out, loud, bouldering, and so close Aemond reasoned this must be a free-roaming dragon, and likely a large one too. He wasn't the only one to land on that conclusion, because his siblings all looked questionably towards Aemond, who silently shook his throbbing head in the negative. No, that wasn't Vermivore. Rhaenyra marched to the windows, pulling aside the drapes to reveal the brightening sky of early dawn, and the enormous dragon hovering above the city. "That's Vhagar," Rhaenyra said. She was right, no doubt about it, but how come Vhagar was here? Her rider had sailed to King's Landing and left Vhagar behind at Dragonstone. Why would she fly through the night to follow him here? And why was she growling that way? Aemond had heard dragons screeching frequently enough to know when one was agitated. "Surely Hagrid can't call her from such a distance," Rhaenyra murmured, craning her neck to keep the dragon in view until she flew straight above the castle and out of sight. They couldn't see her, but they all looked up as Vhagar growled again. The king leaned back in his chair, the energy seeping out of his body. "Regardless of how Vhagar came to be here, someone must call on Lord Rubius to sort her out." It needed to be done with haste too. Vhagar couldn't roam King's Landing as she pleased. She might eat someone, set something on fire, and what if she tried to land on the castle? The roof would cave in. The solar had been frigid with the lingering ghosts of spiteful accusations, but the looks being exchanged now were slightly more uncertain than before, as if no one were eager about inconveniencing Rubius Hagrid at this hour. Did that mean Luke had told the truth about Fang as well? That someone stole the dog from the kennels and tortured him? What of Hariel? This likely meant it was true she'd broken into the black cells and retrieved Fang. And Hariel adored that dog. "This proceeding is at an end," his king father decided. "It was an accident, and Bella will remain where she is, in her new home by her husband's side. I've long wearied of your interminable infighting. Your king demands it cease. Now make your apologies and show goodwill to one another." His mother's mouth wobbled, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. Without a word, she turned on her heel and marched into Aegon's bedchamber. "I'll see that Hagrid handles Vhagar, father." Rhaenyra's eyes were trailed on the partition the queen had disappeared behind as she stepped away from the window. "I can also see how things are faring, though I assume the dog is dead." "Has anyone talked to the dungeon guards yet?" Daemon mused. "We've been caught up with more pressing matters, but I'd advise that we prioritized." "We have the matter under control," Grandfather Otto said coldly. "Unless you're personally involved, I don't see how you can claim to have the situation under control. An unknown is using the king's dungeons as their personal torture chamber, and picking hounds from the castle kennels as they please. The fact that can happen at all means either your guard patrols are a joke, or one of your men is a traitor taking liberties within the king's own home and seat of power. Which one is it, Otto? Incompetence or disloyalty?" his uncle said mockingly. "It's a disgrace. If this is how lax security is at the keep, the city must be lawless. It needs to be sorted out post-haste, unless you wish to risk someone a little more important than a dog to end up mutilated next." The agitated crowd cleared out of Aegon's apartment soon after, trickling away after the king took his leave. Rhaenyra went to sort out Vhagar. Daemon took his daughters away, followed closely by his uncle Ormond and lastly Corlys and Rhaenys. They tried approaching Bella in the doorway, and Aemond was not the only one who'd noticed Daemon's hissed dismissal of the Velaryons. Any other day that would have piqued his curiosity, but Aemond had too much on his mind as is, and made do with exchanging a look with Helena, knowing she had caught it as well. Too tired and ill, Aemond remained behind in the solar and Daeron, Helena and their grandfather. They gathered around the seating area, Aemond collapsing onto the holstered bench at Daeron's side. From there they could hear their mother in the next room, praying by Aegon's bedside while the maester worked. "Is there any water here?" Aemond grumbled, dragging a hand through his loose hair. His head was a little clearer, but his throat was parched. "Where were you?" Daeron asked. "Asleep? Not in your quarters?" "No," Aemond confirmed. "I didn't know, but I came as soon as I heard." Helena went to the door, sending a servant to fetch Aemond his water. Aemond considered serving himself from the water in Aegon's chamber, but that was designated for his brother's recovery. "How's he faring? Will he make it?" "Aegon was in a great amount of pain when we found him," their grandfather answered. "Moving him here was not easy, but Milk of the Poppy told him enough Mr. Orwell could attend to him. It's too early to tell. Aegon lives yet, but his life hangs in the balance. Aegon is strong, Daeron said quietly, nodding to himself. The gods grant him strength, but I believe he will make it. If so, he will be a cripple. Grandfather Otto shook his head. Maybe it was because Aemond hadn't seen the extent of Aegon's injuries, or perchance it was because his brother was asleep, but it didn't feel real. Last night when Aemond stumbled dizzy and disoriented into the study and fell asleep on the bench, everything had been great. Aegon was married, the wedding had been a success, and Harriel had kissed him. Things were good and the future looked brighter. Then Aemond closed his eyes and the next thing he knew he awoke to absolute disaster, and now nothing felt real. An unknown bandit stole Fang from the kennels and tortured him in the king's dungeons. And mere hours after Hagrid was made a lord and Harriel became his betrothed. Who would do that and why? Was this done to threaten Rubius? Was it revenge? To sow distrust and uncertainty? To make a mockery of the king's security? Then there was Aegon. Aegon's only interests were his own indulgences, acting as a wastrel who'd never taken half an interest in his birthright, and yet... Growing up, Aegon had teased Aemond for his lack of a dragon, but the day he bonded with Vermivor, he'd ordered the kitchens to make Aemond's favourite meal, and toasted to his ascent from a prince to a dragon rider. Aemond had trained at arms with Aegon in the yard, gone hunting together, and Aegon always knew how to have fun. They were brothers. Most days Aemond felt an urge to punch him, but Aegon was still his brother. And if Aegon died, then Aemond was next in line to the Iron Throne. The possibility plunged like a stone through his already unsteady stomach. Aemond became keenly aware of everything around him. His heart thrummed hard behind his ribs, the constriction of his throat when he swallowed, the feel of his fingers flexing, as if curling around the contours of an iron armrest. A knock on the door brought Aemond out of his reverie. Sir Criston entered the solar with a handful of supplies. His concern was plain to see, and with a curt nod the Kingsguard headed directly for Aegon's chamber. Quiet murmuring drifted from the bedchamber as Sir Criston inquired after Aegon's health, before he returned to the solar, most of the items gone except Aemond's jug of water. The knight took it upon himself to retrieve goblets from Aegon's cabinet and serve not just Aemond but everyone around the table. Forgive my intrusion, Lord Hand, but may I suggest the children be sent to bed? It's dawn and they haven't been able to rest, Sir Criston said quietly as he handed the last goblet to Daeron. I agree that it be for the best. I know you're concerned, but at present there's nothing you can do to aid Aegon. Daeron hesitated. What if something happens? Aemond guessed what Daeron truly meant was, what if he dies? Aemond lifted his goblet to his lips and drank. The cool relief of the water quenched his mouth and soothed his throat. Then we'll wake you, their grandfather promised. Daeron and Helena rose to their feet, taking the goblets with them, while Aemond had emptied his own in a few greedy mouthfuls, and held it up for a refill. More. Are you unwell, my prince? Sir Criston asked, emptying the remains of the water into his goblet. Aemond shrugged, unwilling to admit the unflattering truth. Besides, the water seemed to have helped settle his stomach somewhat. Maybe he should have done like Daeron and Helena, and taken his goblet with him and left for bed, because now he felt his grandfather's contemplative gaze on him. Where were you, lad? I already told Daeron. I was asleep. Are you drunk? Not anymore, Aemond said wryly. Would you get another jug of water for the prince, Sir Criston? Ever the dutiful knight, the Kingsguard left the solar to comply, while Aemond was suddenly stuck, unable to get away until his grandfather had spoken his piece. If you slept through everything, have you been informed of Lady Harriel's conduct earlier this night? You mean in regard to how she reacted after someone killed her dog? Aemond griped. Lucerys briefed me, though I hoped someone would clarify matters further. It's more than that. She broke into the Black Cells. I was made aware of that too. Lady Harriel was first discovered on the 4th level. It shouldn't be possible to get that far down without being caught. What magics is this? Aemond cocked his head. Does it surprise you? It does not concern you to learn your betrothed can walk through walls unseen? I'm not certain she can, but no. I'm not surprised she got into the cells unseen. Frankly, I'm more surprised she was discovered at all. She did something similar in Winterfell. Hariel sought solitude for an afternoon, and despite Stark turning Winterfell on its head searching for her, no one could locate her, even though she was in the yard the entire time. She cast a spell on the guards. What sort? I've never seen symptoms akin to it. It took hours before two of the men could move anything but their eyes. Aemond tilted his head. I believe I've seen it demonstrated before. She used it today Sir Laenor died during the tavern brawl. It's very effective, isn't it? Complete immobility without either rope or chains. His grandfather looked as if Aemond wasn't asking the right questions, as if he wasn't reacting as expected at all. Hariel's magic is unequaled, Aemond pointed out. It's understandable she'd use it to retrieve what belongs to her, or if she feels a need to defend herself. The guards had no right to apprehend her. I question how she knew where to search for her dog in the first place. The black cells are not somewhere anyone can venture by happenstance. What are you implying? Did Hariel kidnap her own dog, placed him in the cells, tortured him, and then pretended to find him herself? At the same time as she was at dinner and participating in the feast? Grandfather Otto pursed his lips. I don't imply she did it herself, but maybe her magic... Nonsense. Aemond shook his head. Hariel has a gentle heart, and their dog is dear to her. Locating Fang wouldn't be a challenge for their spells either. Rubius was able to track Hariel from Dragonstone to Winterfell. Locating a dog on the same property is child's play in comparison. And what does she have to gain from this? Nothing. His grandfather thought it over, nodding slowly. You speak reason. However, there's been many accusations thrown about. It's hard to know whom aren't being forthcoming. At that, they both glanced towards Aegon's chambers. His stomach gave a discontented jerk, and Aemond wondered if drinking that water might have been a mistake. The instant relief had been appreciated at the time, but it hadn't healed his nausea, and now he suspected the liquid had only loosened the uncomfortable clump precariously held in check by his gut. Regardless of how it happened, we all acknowledge that the situation has grown precarious, Aemond. I trust you realize what this means for yourself. His grandfather's words did nothing to improve Aemond's mood. It promised nothing but grievances. I do not dispute that it was an unfortunate situation, but Lady Hariel frightened the guests with her magic and publicly lost her composure. His grandfather leaned forwards, a deep crease between his brows. Perhaps we need to reconsider our options. We're betrothed, Aemond said quietly through the bile in his throat. He swallowed, but it tasted foul with stomach acids. It has not been announced. Aemond did not want to hear it. And yet the court is aware. They are aware there's a betrothal agreement, but the king has not made an official announcement. We are not squandering this alliance. Have you lost your good sense? After everything... Aemond halted, struggling to maneuver through a burst of fury and a rolling nausea throwing everything out of balance. Neither were useful tools when arguing against a man as pragmatic and focused as his grandfather. Instead, Aemond pointed towards the obvious counter-argument, the one conveniently grumbling right outside their damn window. They have Vhagar. I am not suggesting we break the contract. That'd be a most foolhardy course of action, his grandfather said with infuriating calmness. I am merely recommending a practical alteration. I understand you've grown fond of Lady Hariel, but things have changed, and everyone must do their part to accommodate the situation. It's our duty to the family, and yours to the kingdom, to do what's required of a prince. His grandfather nodded towards Aegon's chamber, his expression one of unspoken but heavy implication. Aegon is not dead. Yet, Aemond whispered through gritted teeth. He really didn't want his mother to hear that part, though it was also because he worried opening his mouth too wide might make him vomit. Restless, agitated, and on the brink, Aemond got to his feet, needing distance from the topic his grandfather was about to burden him with. He should have left when Daron and Helena did. Why had he lingered? Aemond paced up to the window, hoping some fresh air could soothe him. He pried the lock open with sweaty fingers, opened it with a screech of the hinges and welcomed the waft of winter air blowing cool against his heated skin. When he craned his head, he could see Vhagar. She'd landed on the beach next to the Red Keep, but the dragon was so massive her head reached above both the rocky cliffside and castle walls. I pray your brother lives, but if he does not, you will become the king's eldest son. Hearing it acknowledged by someone else made the hairs on his neck stand on end, bringing weight and validity to a long-buried dream, the one he'd struggled to repress whilst his brother's life yet hung in the balance. His entire life, Aemond had been the second son, with the power of the Iron Throne hovering tantalizing within his reach, so maddeningly close yet so far. Every second of his life was appropriated towards how best to serve that seat and the man occupying it. Yet despite Aemond's high birth, tireless efforts and superior achievements, the power itself was never designated for his use. Until now. It was all too clear. His diligent efforts would at last come to fruition, and Aemond would become the one true ruler of Westeros, the one whom lords of Westeros would be bound to answer to, the one seated at the head of the small council, the man wearing the crown and ruling the kingdom from the treacherous heights of the Iron Throne. Aemond wouldn't be the spare heir prince anymore. No, instead he'd become King Aemond of House Targaryen, the first of his name, King of the Andals, the Rhoynar and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm. It could all be his. Granted his whore of a half-sister saw reason. Granted he married someone more suitable than a fallen witch. Granted his brother died. What befell us tonight was a cruel twist of fate, and though we all wish it could be undone, the situation can't be ignored either, his grandfather said. Holding on to goodwill and pray it sees us through is insufficient. It might seem in bad taste to discuss this topic at such a sensitive time, but that is the burden of wielding power. Difficult decisions cannot be delayed, even when it's inconvenient for those tasked to do so. We all pray for Aegon's recovery, but in the meanwhile we should make sure you are not burdened with obligations that might work against your favor. Considering recent events, I propose that Daron would make a more suitable husband to Lady Hariel. I'm sure Lord Baratheon won't oppose his daughter marrying you instead, Aemond. Aemond couldn't have replied even if he wished to. Instead he heaved as the nausea burst forth like an imploding dam. All Aemond could do was throw himself forwards as he became violently sick. Bent at the waist and clutching the window for support, he hacked and wretched while the content of his stomach poured over the frame. It kept going, so intense he could hardly draw breath until his stomach was utterly wrung out, staining the red wall of the keep in the wet chunks of yesterday's wedding dinner. A night of victorious merriment turned to sickness on his tongue.